So in the beginning, Dekyan, I was really, really actually concerned to let on that I did have a chronic disease.
Mhm.
And from, I'd say, 9 years ago was my diagnosis. And from that time, I was very apprehensive because I thought that people might think, oh, if she has a chronic disease and I have a chronic neurological disease,
Mhm.
actually. If she has a disease, then how is she going to be able to be available at all times or do what she needs to do? I was scared people would think that, not take me seriously.
Mhm.
Actually, like you said, it ended up being a huge strength for me. I get to see things from the perspective of a patient, a clinician, and a researcher, an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
obviously. I see what's missing. I see what goes unseen.
Hey, welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech, and thank you for tuning in to episode 146. I'm your host, Dirk-Jan Hupkes, and this is the podcast that closes the funding gap in venture capital by amplifying the stories of female founders and their investors. In today's episode, I'm joined by Faviola Dadis, and Faviola is the co-founder of BrainBoostXR. With BrainBoostXR, she is building an AI and VR-based rehabilitation tool for people with an acquired brain injury. That includes stroke, tumor, and head injury as a result of accidents or sports. In other words, any brain injury that happens during your life. We often associate these brain injuries with cognitive decline. But as she explains, what people lose first is not intelligence, it's independence, confidence, sense of control. And that lack of dignity changes how people engage with recovery. In this episode, we talk about why nearly 50% of people with an acquired brain injury don't complete their rehabilitation, how technology can improve both their rehab and recovery, and how Faviola's perspective as a patient shapes everything she builds as a founder. Plus, if you stick around till the end, she shares some very practical learnings from her fundraising journey. So when you're ready to hear how she's restoring dignity for people with an acquired brain injury with BrainBoost XR, here's my conversation with Faviola Dadis. Faviola Dadis, welcome to Women Disrupting Tech. Welcome back, I should say. You were a previous guest in episode 4. Back then, you were the founder of NeuroReality, and now you're the co-founder of BrainBoost XR. Please tell us what happened in between. What was that journey like from NeuroReality to BrainBoost XR?
So, thank you firstly for having me back on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to be with you, Dirk-Jan. And let's take a dive into my transition from neuroreality to BrainBoost XR, and also just what it meant for me to do this in the
Mm-hmm.
long term, in terms of my vision, in terms of my goals, and how we're going to help patients better in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So, Neuroreality being my first company, albeit I was always an entrepreneur since I was a little girl, I would actually crush up little crystals, for example, that you might find in someone's yard and put them in a bag and sell them as fairy dust.
Mm-hmm.
I would do funny things like taking juniper berries and also putting them in sachets and selling them as potpourri. So from the beginning, I've always had a very entrepreneurial mindset. With neuroreality, I really feel that in paving the way for everything that followed, um, it was something that was what I wanted to do. However, so what I wanted to do, meaning it was built around immersive XR, so
Mm-hmm.
utilizing virtual reality and neuroscience while the field was still very early. We weren't in the blue ocean. There were a couple of other individuals that were doing something similar,
Yeah.
but not the same. And the technology was much more static than what I had ultimately envisioned. Many of the adaptive and personalized features that I dreamed of,
Mm.
they weren't capable of being implemented or simply weren't feasible yet at the time when neuroreality had its inception, which was um, in 2017, all the way back then. So I really started studying artificial intelligence as early as around 2014, 2015.
Mhm.
So far before it became sort of this mainstream hype that it
Yeah.
is right now.
Mhm.
And even though um, these things that I dreamed of with neuroreality weren't possible,
Mhm.
there was a gap to be bridged. And I knew that the convergence of AI and XR, VR in our case, and the data that we would be able to capture and manipulate would eventually allow me to build systems that really could adapt in real time and could be utilized for personalized care in a different way than what we did in a more static form. So,
Yeah.
uh, think of a game where you would play these different sets of cognitive domains, each had its own mini game.
Yeah.
And then in Brain Boost XR, we take that steps further, include far more personalization, and I will get into that in a minute.
Mm.
So I'll tell you why Brain Boost exists.
Mm.
It exists because the technology finally caught up with what my vision was.
Mhm.
And I realized that VR training isn't enough. Cognition alone isn't enough.
Mhm.
In order to treat individuals, and I should mention for our listeners that are not familiar, I primarily work with acquired brain injury patients, although our solution is scalable, our product is scalable.
Yeah, and
But
acquired brain injury, maybe also for context, is people who have had a stroke
so
of
acquired brain
sorts.
injury is any type, indeed, you're correct, that is included in the overall umbrella term acquired brain injury, which basically refers to any type of a brain injury that you incurred after birth. So a
Yeah.
congenital disease is something that you have, you're born with, and something that is acquired is quite obvious for any
Mhm.
English speaking individual. So that would include stroke, traumatic brain injuries, for example, from an accident, or individuals that play sports.
Yeah,
There's lots of ways that
concussions.
you can, concussions, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, Brain tumors, encephalitis, infections. We are even now actually looking at something that might surprise individuals, but doesn't surprise me.
Mm.
That PTSD, or PTSS for our
Yeah.
Dutch listeners, is now starting to make its way into the acquired brain injury territory. And that's because having this actually really physically changes your brain. So
Oh.
that's something that is very new in our field. And I'm sure other researchers will have their own opinions, of course,
Mhm.
but this is something that we are starting to integrate into practice, that this is a type of acquired brain injury as well, one that you might not expect.
Oh.
So I hope that answers your question, because I do think that not everyone knows what an acquired brain injury is, or what it entails and how it can impact your life if you
Mhm.
have one, your friends and family, and your caregivers, the type of care that you need.
Yeah.
So, in realizing that cognitive rehabilitation in and of itself is not enough,
Mhm.
and it was something that really clicked with me in working with all of the patients that I have throughout my career, and especially with neuroreality, that what people lose first after a brain injury isn't necessarily, or during aging, isn't intelligence, but independence, confidence, autonomy, And most importantly, a word that you might hear me use quite frequently, dignity.
Yeah.
This is something that I think is really huge for people. They want to remain dignified no matter what they go through in their lives. People
Yeah.
all deserve that type of dignity. So I think that's really why I wanted to create something a little bit different. Let's say leveling up
Mm-hmm.
from our reality and including things that I might have missed and learned were much better for patients, caregivers, and clinicians.
Mm-hmm.
So, to that extent, what do we do at
Mm-hmm.
BrainBoostXR?
Yep.
So, we utilize gamified VR experiences with rewards and progression that helps to solve adherence, which is one of the biggest failures in rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
Generally speaking, we have about less than a 50% adherence rate, somewhere between 35 to 50% adherence rates. Training is designed actually in, as I said, a more static way.
Yeah.
So people get bored. And if you're playing a game, then you're getting all of these rewards. You're much more inclined to go back and play that game again,
Yeah.
especially if it has a story arc. So that was something that was missing in Koji's Quest, the game that we developed at Neuroreality. This game is far more sophisticated. So it has a story arc. And in this sense, we're able to get people to want to come back and play
Mm-hmm.
because for them, it's playing as opposed to doing rehabilitation that might be extremely difficult. So, the training that we do is intended to transfer to real world functions, activities of daily living,
Mm-hmm.
um, and instrumental activities of daily living, which in turn impact your quality of life. So, what I mean by that is, for example, imagine that you've sustained a brain injury and you would like to cross the street safely.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that we do in our everyday lives. However, if your attention is impaired or your visuospatial skills are impaired,
Mm-hmm.
you might not be able to do that safely. However, in a virtual reality setting that is, albeit gamified, you can still do this safely. And that was one of the biggest things that I think I really missed was making sure that not only are we targeting the individual's deficits, but doing it in a way that is taking them through their own journey as well. And I think that it's really important to make sure that, again, the word dignity,
Mm-hmm.
individuals retain this. And that means being able to do the things, interact with the environment that they're capable of once having done before. So, what we can create is immersive environments where we're continuously capturing behavioral and physiological data. So, for example, reaction time, gaze patterns, movement consistency, all sorts of things that are being collected by the VR experience are extremely valuable data for us.
Mm-hmm.
And the interactions that individuals take within the game is all adapted by AI. And the way that we do this is collecting these signals from digital biomarkers,
Mm-hmm.
and then we map them onto personalized digital twins. And I don't know if I need to explain for our audience what a digital twin is.
Yeah, maybe before we go there, let me see if I can summarize this in my own words, what you just said. So, what I'm hearing you say is that what Brain Boost XR does, it's a sort of game that people can play with VR goggles
Correct.
uh, that adapts automatically to their level, so
Absolutely.
they can play at their own pace, which then plays into the dignity part, I think, but also keeps track of how they progress over time.
You are
Yeah.
absolutely correct.
And this helps people with acquired brain injuries to, can you say recover?
Yes, well,
Can people fully recover from traumatic brain injuries? Because I think that depends a bit on the type of injury. Yeah.
it depends on the type of injury, the severity of the injury, the individual at hand. Everyone is different. We
Mhm.
are all unique individuals. So, indeed, it really does depend. And can we recover completely? Well, generally speaking, in current practice, a lot of the time, if you go through a brain injury, you'll receive some type of psychoeducation, meaning you will understand a little bit better where you are and the things that might be changing,
Mhm.
what you need to do in order to live out your life. That's
Yeah.
quite a grim outlook if you're just told, go on your way. Here's a little bit of education about this.
Yeah.
Then you see caregivers who are stuck. And by caregivers, I mean family members, friends, not just someone that's a professional. People want to help, but they don't necessarily always know what to do. So some people will fully recover, and some people will be healthy, but may have different tics, let's say, for the rest of their life
Uh-huh.
that could be hard for them to get used to, but they will learn. The most important thing that I think to press is that years ago, we did not understand that neuroplasticity, the ability of our brain to rewire and
Mhm.
function after an injury, was capable of being induced years after the injury. So, not just, of course, we like early intervention,
Yeah.
and that leads us early detection, prevention, um, earlier ability to give personalized care. But that's not to say that someone needs to do this immediately after their injury. In chronic patients that are, for example, 20 years progressed past having a stroke,
Uh,
we can still apply these different techniques. And we know now that functionally and in terms of structure, our
uh,
brain can change and we can help with recovery. So, not everyone will recover fully,
yeah.
but what we can do is reduce the burden of them living a lower quality of life. And that I think is very important.
Yeah. Because that again plays into the dignity part.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah. And the other thing I heard you say is that it's sort of and that also applied, I think, to Koji's Quest, the neural reality product, that you are actually able to play this in a sort of safe environment
Correct.
because you're there virtually. You're not really crossing the street. Like I was thinking of, okay, I had to we had to teach the cats, but also the neighbors had to teach their son how to cross the street. And
Correct.
once you have done that like a couple of times, you know, okay, I have to look left, I have to look right, then make
It's
sure that
self
there's still no, so really um, being mindful about it. Not like many of us do nowadays, cross the street while tapping into our phone. Um,
Right?
but
Isn't that terrible? I actually do the same and I am guilty of it as charged. I need to actually set my own example.
yeah,
But that's exactly what you're saying. That's very true. With virtual reality, we can actually make realistic environments and make them fun.
yeah,
Uh, but as you said, there's so many distractors and there are so many things that you have learned and you have hardwired. Look left, look right.
yeah.
Let's check out the walking signal. Let's listen to the patterns of the click, 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 click,
Yeah, but also listen to the patterns of cars. Do
of the
I hear a
cars,
car coming?
of the bikes, of
Yeah.
other pedestrians. All of these different things are important for an individual to then, for example, go grocery shopping, which is
Uh,
also an absolutely necessary instrumental activity of daily living.
yeah.
So that is something that Koji's Quest did not take into account. That was purely cognitive training.
Yeah.
And so now we're transferring that into cognitive training that translates into training in real life. And as you
Yeah.
said, can you imagine if we had the number of caregivers that were capable of taking an individual in rehab and teaching them physically to walk across the street? Um, it's just not something that's done. I would say that that would be the optimal situation for
Mm.
everybody, but this is, in my viewpoint, a second best. It gives an individual an opportunity to learn these types of skills again without having, for example, a physical or occupational therapist with them to teach them these things.
Yeah. Yeah. And the final thing I wanted to touch on, and I think that is something that is, it was the strong point of Koji's Quest, but it's also, as I hear you, the strong point of Brain Boost XR. You keep people coming back to it. So people actually do complete that rehabilitation instead of dropping off. And I heard you say that there was like a 50% drop off. 50% of people who have a acquired brain injury don't finish the recovery process.
You are correct, and it is generally I'll say 50% because I'm being conservative. Literature would state I think around 35 to 45% of individuals don't actually complete their rehabilitation protocols, which is really, really sad to hear. But I think that that's sort of a systematic issue
Yeah.
and not understanding what's necessary for an individual to feel that motivation and feel that autonomy over their own lives instead of um, just a lot of the time, I don't know if you've ever been to or our audience has been to a rehabilitation facility or hospital.
Mhm.
People are alone.
Yeah.
Uh, they're alone a lot of the time unless they're getting vital checkups. To give them something to do that can help increase their autonomy, I think is very important. That leads to higher adherence. The reward system that we evoke the brain's dopaminergic activities. That's what gives us this surge of reward. I think that's a really important aspect that was included in both games,
Mhm.
albeit I am making it far more personalized in Brain Boost XR. We have two games, by the way.
Mhm.
So our B2B product is called Brainstar, and our B2C product is called Star Chasers. And that is for individuals who are just interested in cognitive wellness and keeping their brain vitality sharp.
Yeah.
So I think moving into something I didn't get to mention with regards to the cognitive biomarkers
Mhm.
is, so while we're continuing to capture this, and as you said, it personalizes it, it
Mhm.
makes it adaptable for the individual so that they can complete it at the level that they're capable of completing it at. Not too difficult, not too easy.
Mhm.
So we take all of the digital biomarkers and then we map them onto the digital twin. And that's where I think some people may not know what a digital twin is, but just simply put, it's a virtual replica of something physical that you can constantly update with real world data. So it behaves like the real thing. It helps researchers and innovators like ourselves predict outcomes so we can
Mhm.
create these synthetic patients
Yeah.
and give them different attributes and then run simulations which are very interesting. Instead of utilizing a patient straight away,
Mhm.
we can map all of these biomarkers and we can, in the beginning, what you do in order to make a simulated patient
Mhm.
is essentially look at the research data, look at what types of fatigue slopes, reaction times, error rates individuals with a particular disability might have,
Mhm.
and then compare those to healthy aging controls.
Yeah.
So we can simulate all of this data, but for each individual, their biomarkers are mapped onto their digital twin. this digital twin is consistently updating. So it's a feedback cycle,
Yeah.
and it goes back into the game. And then in that way, we're able to utilize machine learning algorithms to really personalize and tailor everything that we're doing to that individual.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is basically the, what you start building is a sort of, let's say, a copy profile of the actual patient. This copy profile is then basically the performance is mapping onto the general population of people who have been working on, with BrainBoost XR with one of the games.
I will stop you right there. So, first, it maps directly onto that particular individual's
Yeah,
profile.
yeah,
And from there, we have digital twin cohorts that are healthy. And we can then look at what the progression of the disease state is. We can intervene earlier and detect different subtle changes earlier, leading to the personalized care. So these digital twins, they're basically your digital replica.
yeah,
And from that gameplay, all of this data is being integrated. And then, as I said, in a feedback loop, we're continually updating the game that the individuals are playing in order to make sure that they are receiving the preventative care that they actually need instead of, for example, someone is doing extremely well and we can see that with their visuospatial skills, yet they are actually lacking the insight for higher learning and planning and reasoning. So then
yeah.
we can focus more on that. Um,
Ah,
but
okay. So basically, and visual spatial skills is about how to move around in a certain space. So how to move around in a room or how to cross a street. In fact,
navigation is
mm,
included, wayfinding is included, which we now all have our cell phones and use Google Maps.
yeah,
But in general, we used to have to figure out, and we still do, of course,
yeah,
our way, and then as well visual construction. So those are all contained in visuospatial skills, which are extremely important in our lives.
yeah.
The construction aspect. Imagine if you're trying to put away your pots and pans, you're trying to fit them, and stack
Mhm.
them correctly. That's a real world example of visuospatial construction.
What are things that you learned in the past years, let's say, in between neural reality and building Brain Boost XR? What are developments in the about cognitive decline, about acquired brain injury that you didn't have when you were building neural reality that you can apply now?
Okay, so one of the things that I really learned about cognitive decline is that one, it's not a one size fits all type of a care,
Mhm.
that we knew, but that adaptivity really needs to be focused on learning particular skills that are meaningful and contextual, so that when they go into their daily lives again, they're capable of feeling more confident in carrying out these different things.
Mhm.
Something else that I really noted is that cognitive health, and I mentioned this before, it's not enough. So we also take into account and consideration that a lot of these individuals end up with social isolation.
Yeah.
This is extremely detrimental to their recovery process. And to that extent, another aspect of the game that is woven in and also maps in the same way with all of these biomarkers is our virtual companion. And our virtual companion is very different than that of the companion in Koji's Quest from
Mhm.
Neuroreality. This virtual companion is actually capable of having 24/7 multilingual conversations with you. So, if you were to say to the companion, and a lot of people don't feel comfortable necessarily talking to a friend or someone who hasn't experienced a brain injury.
Mhm.
So to give them a place where they don't feel so lonely is something that I really learned is very important because of their loss of independence, confidence, or perhaps their own self trust,
Mhm.
um, and the increased caregiver burden. This is something that's really helpful. Loneliness erodes dignity far before cognitive decline will set in. Um, and it actually equates to a loss in our global economy of about $460 billion per year. So I think that's a really, really huge problem that needs to be tackled along with these cognitive problems to make them feel capable, connected, and
Yeah.
respected again. So imagine you say to your virtual companion, I've experienced a stroke. I don't feel like myself anymore. I think
Mhm.
that's a good way to put it. I don't feel like myself anymore. Your companion will respond to you compassionately. However, if you want to give your companion a different personality type because you like dark humor,
Mhm.
you can actually even discuss with your companion, "Hey, I'd prefer to have a companion. Could you maybe give me some, dark humor to put some light into this situation that we're going
Uh-huh.
through?" And the companion will adapt to the individual's personal behavioral and um, yeah, connect the way that people connect is it's always different, right?
Yeah.
Everyone has personality.
Mhm.
So you can say for our Dutch listeners, yeah, I don't speak English very well. And the companion would, and you can ask it, do you speak Dutch?
Mhm.
And the companion would reply back, will stop and say, ah, natuurlijk. Ik kan
Yeah.
wel Nederlands praten. And then
Yeah.
it will move forward just seamlessly into the language that you're trying to achieve. So
Is that also one of the powers that AI has been bringing?
absolutely.
Because I was about to ask, so you're now using much more AI. The Coach's Quest was already really data driven, and there was progression in there built in there. But um, AI has, of course, developed over the past years as well. How does that help? Other than that, it's easier to switch languages and make games adaptable to a personal situation.
It's such a powerful tool because what it does is it enables in our case, it enables this continuous personalization online. So not after the individual has finished playing their game, but while they're actually playing, everything is adapted via the virtual environment
Mhm.
for that particular person's abilities. The companion is adapting. And without AI, none of these biomarkers or adaptations would really be possible in real time. So, something that was once an NPC, something that you couldn't play, for example, a character in a game that has a set amount of things that it will say to you.
Mhm.
Now you can actually have a conversation and say to your AI companion, for example, I really don't understand. I still don't get it. And instead of you feeling undignified or like your child trying to learn something,
Mhm.
they'll reinforce and be like, "That's okay. This is a hard task. Let me help you out with it."
Mhm.
So I think that without AI, that's not possible. Without AI, it's not possible to utilize different techniques, for example, machine learning, decision trees, all sorts of different things that we do in AI in order to understand what does it mean to have a cognitive biomarker that is lower, that shows lower reaction time, for example, than someone that is a healthy aging individual.
Mhm.
We can take all these myriads of data and we could individually determine different outcomes based upon it. But what AI does is it can take this and it summarizes. This is just a very rudimentary layman way of explaining.
Mhm.
It takes all of that data that we're not necessarily capable of computing in our brains as quickly because our brains are limited in their capacity.
Mhm.
So it's this really powerful combination of continually personalizing rather than leaving an individual in a static environment. So that's how we utilize AI, and we utilize AI for good. That does not necessarily mean that everyone does. I think that it's really necessary to say, especially with working with clinical populations, we have indeed had some bloopers. You have to
Mhm.
put guardrails on your AI.
Yeah.
They're eager to learn, little babies, and they learn very quick. So the first generation of AIs has been developed by us.
Mhm.
The next generation is going to be developed by other AIs. We already see this.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting, though, because the amount of data that it can process so quickly helps us make these clinical decisions in a much more um, in a much faster way for ourselves as well in order to help the patient.
So the first version of AI was built by humans, and the next versions will be built
AIs.
by AIs. How do you keep bias out, and how important is that?
How do we keep bias out is a very, very difficult question because what happens right now is individuals train these different types of AI. So you've heard probably in the news about a company or so, because there's
Mm.
quite a few right now that are experiencing this, that have developed AIs in order to help optimize processes.
Mhm.
And then these AIs, um, they can become biased. They can
Huh?
hallucinate even. It's a strange thing and a strange way to talk about an artificially intelligent agent, but they will then take their own preference and their
Mhm.
own intuition, their own data that they've been trained on, and make
Yeah.
their own decisions. So if you are not, like I said, it's an eager to learn little baby. So if you
Mhm.
are not programming your AI in a way that has these different guardrails and really making sure that it is learning the way that you want it to learn,
Mhm.
then you might run into some problems of bias there. There have been cases where an AI has made a decision um, in a large Fortune 500 company. I'm not going to get into the user case very much, but went in and deleted hundreds of thousands of their client database and important information that belonged to that. What happens, and you'll see that with ChatGPT also for certain
Mhm.
individuals, don't always trust your AI.
No.
So you can often then tell it, hey, you didn't do what I asked you to do. And the AI will respond in kind. Oh, you're correct. I did not compute this task appropriately.
Mhm.
And that's based upon the bias that they have, of course, with the data that they've been
Mhm.
trained upon, excuse me. And then that's often where you'll see them hallucinate, which is crazy. They'll start, in one case, I saw they were apologizing, multiple lines of code. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm not good enough. So they clearly also learned from data that people feel
Mhm.
sometimes that they're not good enough if if they complete a task incorrectly.
Uh-huh.
So AI it's a very powerful tool, but question it, it needs to be used ethically. If I type something into ChatGPT that I know is wrong,
Mhm.
ask ChatGPT, do a little test, yourself. It's a fun test. Just say, 1 + 1 = 3
Mhm.
and see what the AI comes back to you with, It will probably say, that's not correct. 1 + 1 = 2. And then it may go in depth into other mathematical scenarios using imaginary numbers,
Mhm.
etc., where 1 + 1 may equal 3.
Yeah.
But that is a very good point, DJ, to ask where do we create the bias in AI, or does it create itself?
Yeah, because what you basically do with Brain Boost XR is also make, let's say, cognition and aging measurable
Correct.
in terms of and you do that with data. So how and you work with digital twins that are then mapped back onto the, let's say, the general population. So how it's really important, I would think, that the the feedback loop back to the individual is such that it is, well, maybe not unbiased, because there's always everyone is biased, but um, debiased to the extent that it's like stripped of the biases that are not functional. How do you keep that non-functional bias out?
With different techniques, so now we move to AI that are more machine learning techniques.
Mm,
Um, you have different ways of parsing out what is useful data versus what is not useful data for
mm,
us. And in that sense, actually, the data that we collect is far less biased than the data that a human would collect. So a human might be giving a cognitive test and they may be trained to administer this. However, they may be biased in the way that they were learned to score it. That's not always the case, that individuals are scoring things in the same way,
mhm,
or that cognitive tasks are particularly interesting for an individual from a different culture, right? So you have to make sure that you're keeping all of this in line with one another,
yeah.
and that the bias sort of doesn't leak into other areas where we don't want it to. And that's where the digital twins and the biomarkers come into play, because with AI, it can give us information and actually, I'll use the word slightly, tell us what are these important biomarkers. Hey, reaction time, or the standard deviation between the reaction time, the error rate, this was the most important biomarker that you should be looking at for this
Mm,
particular individual. So for a clinician, we can watch them, we can see what they're doing in terms of their cognitive training and their developmental skills, but we can't take human bias out of that. And there's far less bias in AI based upon the fact that it is sparsing out what is good for that individual as it's been mapped onto the digital twin, and what might not necessarily be something that needs to be. um, I say that we should have a holistic training of all cognitive functions because they link with one another,
mhm,
but it does eliminate the bias of clinician to say, okay, this individual is impaired past the point that I can't even quite understand where their deficits are coming from. Oh, okay, well, we have a digital twin that is loaded with biomarkers for you.
yeah.
And then something I think is important to mention is utilizing the reward system in the game is really for the patients. And I think that if you would see the clinical dashboard that the people caring for these patients get, with this very, very specific, tailored um, metrics that are understandable in a way that researchers and clinicians would like to look at, but not for patient. Patient doesn't necessarily need to know their error rate or their reaction time or these things. Certain patients will want to, and we will give them rudimentary,
Mhm,
different, data, of course, that you would get in gameplay. But the reward system is actually really what will keep them coming back. So we don't want to create bias in clinicians or caregivers or their perceptions of an individual. We're allowing an AI within the control, and I think the golden standard should always be that a clinician is there supervising and making decisions later on. not just the AI. In China, we have full AI hospitals now, which is actually quite
Oh,
amazing. Um, yes,
that.
check it out if you haven't already. It's very interesting. But there still needs to be a golden standard where humans come into play. And with that, I don't think that we can ever take bias out of anything completely, but we can minimize it to a great extent.
Let's switch gears
Okay.
because you're building BrainBoostXR. Um, so you also need people to buy it, to pay for it. Um, you have a B2B product and a B2C product. So take us through, um, basically how this works in a commercial environment. Who buys it? Who pays for it, etc. Is this something that can be that insurance companies are looking at?
Absolutely. So, clinicians and insurance companies look at new tech in a very skeptical way at first because they have been doing things in a certain way. Some individuals can be dogmatic, and with regards to insurance, there aren't always the codes that can cover and reimburse this type of care.
Mhm,
That is changing. We already see with DICHA in Germany that
mhm,
they have codes already to compensate individuals through their insurance for these types of cognitive exercises and software as a medical device, med tech, all of these different things that are now also starting to be adopted by other countries. So when I look at the way that the world is evolving, VR no longer needs to be proven in healthcare. That was the case with neuroreality.
mhm,
Being one of those first to the tables, we had to really carve out a space and show through pilot after pilot how does VR fit into healthcare. Um, so now what we see is that a growing number of not only households, because this is very common when I speak to, I'd say about 50%, maybe even more of my friends now own VR devices.
mhm,
And hospitals as well now have their own VR sets.
mhm,
This isn't something where before it was that acceptance was high, people were very interested, but adoption was quite low.
yeah.
So now we've made the understanding or the leap to the understanding that adoption is essentially driven by feasibility, adherence, functional outcomes,
Mhm,
not novelty, not something that's special and new, but how much time is it going to save? Is it cost effective?
mhm,
Is it evidence based over hype?
yeah.
And I think that our focus now really is trying to make sure that, as you said, so we have different customer segments and it can become confusing. Are you selling to the patient directly? Or are you doing this via telehealth to the patient directly, B2B to C even?
Mhm,
B2B, and with insurance companies, they are really looking to eliminate readmittance. They don't want people to continue to have more and more problems and have to come back over and over again.
mhm,
So once you can show that you can up adherence and you can actually give feasible evidence that this is improving an individual's quality of life, their daily life, and again, their dignity.
mhm,
Um, Sometimes, as you said, and we talked about before, people might not be able to recover completely, but
mhm,
they should still have dignity restored. Uh, this business model works differently for each segment, but has the same underlying principles. For individuals that are just playing for fun on Steam, for example,
mhm,
these are people that are understanding that a game doesn't just have to be a game. Serious gaming has become quite something that is accepted as well.
Yeah.
So people are interested. We're living older and older. We're living, we're getting to live longer lives, and we're having less caretakers for this. This is also why AI is sort of stepping in the healthcare
Uh-huh.
sector. So I think that when an individual is playing this just as an individual, so we still get the data from those individuals, and we're very transparent about that. I think that's really important, is data security, data privacy, making sure that the individual knows what their data is going to be used for.
Mhm.
This is something that's really, really important. So
Yeah.
for our consumers, our B2C individuals that will uptake Star Chasers, they will get these more rudimentary level metrics, and it will be far more game like. We try with the clinical product to maintain integrity between every cognitive domain such that it's possible for you to track, okay, here I was examining attention. Here I was examining reasoning and planning. Whereas in the B2C game, it's the same thing, but people aren't necessarily aware of that. And we may give them different metrics. We're still in developmental phases of that and how we
Mm.
should deploy it to healthy aging
Yeah.
individuals.
Is this data that you can actually, for lack of a better word, plug into your um, electronic patient file? So
Yeah.
data that you can actually bring to a physician or a clinician and say, "Hey, listen, I've had a stroke. This is my profile before,
And this is my profile now.
well now," and they can actually help you recover based on that.
So I think in a similar way that people use wearables nowadays, um, people will often take that information,
Hmm.
and previously doctors wouldn't necessarily have said, okay, this is something I'm going to pay attention to. Now that's not the case at all.
No.
They will use it as a guide. Doctors often find it very helpful if you say, I've been experiencing fluctuations in my heart rate, and I can notice that and I can show you that data based upon my wearable that has collected all this physiological information about me.
Yeah.
In the same way, we can take those metrics and someone could say, this is actually how you know, I've been doing. And can you maybe help me out? Because I see that there are changes in the way that I'm thinking or behaving.
Mhm.
And again, similar to a wearable, you wouldn't necessarily think of a game in that same way, but it's an app like any other that collects the data and then can have that profile transferred into the electronic patient files,
Yeah.
hopefully seamlessly. We'll work on that along with different clinicians um, and hospitals, especially UMC hospitals, where they're very focused on utilizing these different techniques and researching them,
Yeah.
making sure that it's rigorously tested before applied. That's also why we do simulations on patients
Hmm.
nowadays too, instead of having patient actors, which is like real actors actually,
Yeah.
that would go in and you would work with them. So we can do all of these different things, and then patient that has experienced this but was previously healthy can be like, I've been playing this game. It's been tracking a lot of metrics for me.
Mhm.
Um, Here's what's going on.
Yeah.
And then from there, I know it sounds very simple the way that I'm explaining it, and just trying to make it as digestible as possible, something that is highly scientific and quite, as it requires a lot of in-depth discussion to get into for another
Mhm.
time. But yes, long answer long, yes.
Okay.
They can
So,
do that.
to what extent are insurance companies interested in the data that you have? Not necessarily on an individual level, but more on a population level, so they can actually do like calculations on okay, how are populations actually aging cognitively, also on readmittance rates, because I think one of the plays here is also, if I understand correctly, that if adherence goes up, readmittance goes down.
Absolutely. That is the case. So, insurance companies and other companies, but again, this needs to be transparent with the patients, with everyone that you're working with, what your data is being used for. They can buy our data. Other institutions can also buy our data.
Hmm.
But that being said, uh, what's driving exactly as you mentioned, the ability for insurance companies to say, yes, we approve this. We're going to say that this is something that we will cover for an individual. That is largely determined upon making sure that what you're doing is benefiting this entire population, leading to lower care costs
Hmm.
and lower readmittance rates, higher adherence levels, and better outcomes. Something that's very interesting as well is that we could work with insurance companies, for example, applying this particular modality of treatment, a game, essentially, and then pairing it with digital twins. So, without having to utilize actual patients, with medications that they would provide for a stroke survivor, for
Hmm.
example. And then trying the myriad of all of these different medications and looking at different patient cohorts that are digital twin cohorts based
Hmm.
upon population data that has already
Hmm.
been researched and established norms. And then can say, this is the best drug fit for this particular individual, or this
Hmm.
is the best drug fit overall. They're saving money. They don't want to have to keep doling out compensation if it's not working.
Yeah,
So
it
I
sort
think
of takes it out of the experimentation phase.
absolutely it
Yeah.
does. It makes it real and quantifiable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that AI enables, but also that you do with BrainBoost XR. So I was wondering, so we've been talking about what it does for society, what it does for individual patients in terms of how they can be successful using Boost XR software. How do you define success for you personally as an entrepreneur?
Long-term adoption rather than, again, just hype.
Hmm.
So people adopting this in the future moving forward, um, us being a leader in cognitive care and brain vitality. I like to use the word brain vitality because it encompasses a large portion of just not just cognitive health, but
Hmm.
the wellness that someone experiences, feeling good about themselves, and our brain drives everything that we do, essentially.
Hmm.
So, um, measurable improvements in quality of life. I really would love to see that because if you can make someone happier and you can see that their quality of life is improving, that's just really a joy. As a clinician, as a researcher, when I work with my patients, when I get to see that,
Hmm.
that makes me extremely, extremely happy. And for me, that's definition of success is helping others. And in turn, then that makes you happy, right?
Yeah,
Um, sustainability for the users, the clinicians, for my company. And then overall, again, making people feel capable, respected, and dignified again. That's how
that's
that's how I would define it.
sounds like a great definition of success.
Thank you.
Um, with that, I want to move to a number of questions I had for you because you're a female founder. You've had a company before, and now I have
Yes.
a new company. So I want to see if we can extract some learnings for the female founders who are listening to this episode who haven't been on the full journey yet. So you're exited from your first company.
With XR Health in the United States, I feel it's in a very good home.
Yeah,
Very, very happy with them.
yeah, because XR Health was one of the partners you were already working with. Yeah,
They were our largest distributor. Yes,
yeah,
indeed. And they're that's why I like to say that I feel that Koji's Quest and our reality is in a good home.
hmm,
And I do believe that XR Health is really lowering the barriers to adoption of these types of products. So I'm happy that it ended up in a good place with
hmm,
my exit there. Um, and from that point, you do feel a little bit like you're losing your baby,
hmm,
but your baby has grown up and now you're ready to get pregnant again. It's
yeah,
a sort of a terrible analogy, but
yeah,
essentially, you really are birthing something, you know? We
yeah,
send congratulatory cards all the time for someone that's had a baby, but do you send a congratulatory card to someone that's just started a new business? People understand how much that takes?
yeah,
Like, I don't think that people understand that when you create something from scratch like that, it is so meaningful, important to you that it even sometimes can become a part of your identity.
yeah,
So, yeah, I'm very pleased that it found itself in a good place.
yeah.
And so moving forward, I'm sure that you have other questions,
Yeah,
for
there was one on the founding a company. Actually, I had Aniek Lamers from Borski on, and she said, "Why don't we have business baby showers?"
yeah,
Which
that's
is
a great I love
which
Borsky. Borsky is a great fund, by the way.
and they I think they also onboarded Claire Tange now, who's also a seasoned investor with Joanna Invests. So
I
that's
just I was just speaking with someone yesterday about Borski,
mm,
coincidentally, and it is Claire Tonga
yeah,
that they were discussing,
yeah,
who had all of these wonderful new ideas with regards to how investments should go, which I think is a really nice bridge into female investor landscape and how do we as female founders get a piece of the pie?
yeah,
Uh, this is very daunting figure I'm about to give you.
mm,
In the Netherlands, 0.7% of female founders will acquire venture capital funding. So that means that if we have 100 people in the room
mm,
and they're all men and there's one female, only even part of her gets to get counted.
yeah,
So not even the full female that's
yeah,
standing there. In other information that's been published and studies that have been conducted, you may see an increase of about 2 to 3% of female founders will
mm,
get VC funding. If you add a man, and that's something I have done differently, it's not that I don't believe in women in STEM. I'm a huge proponent of women and girls in STEM,
mm,
but I'm also a realist who understands business.
mm,
And as an entrepreneur, if you take on a co-founder, so I founded this and then I thought to myself, all right, unfortunately, I'm going to need a man. Not
mm,
unfortunately to you, DJ,
mm,
but that ups your chances just slightly more to 9 to 12% approximately. So teams that are led by women, you're getting the tiniest piece of the pie. Mixed teams are getting a little bit more traction in terms of VC capital, but it's
yeah.
still
Early on, it's actually quite
so difficult.
okay. For mixed teams, it's actually quite okay. Pre-seed, I think it's even in the 45% range that mixed teams get from VC, but
However,
that doesn't trickle through to seed and later still.
no, it doesn't. Absolutely not. And generally speaking, in those early phases, you are expected in certain environments. So I think that's why you see a lot of founders heading outside of the EU or to different countries. We're based in the Netherlands
Mm.
here. We have extremely risk-averse investors. They will not invest oftentimes unless you've shown a specific type of traction that they want to see.
Yeah.
We need more investors that understand in the early phase, regardless of gender, that there, there is something to be said about investing when there's an ideation phase or someone is developing their MVP. That
Mhm.
rarely happens,
Yeah.
DJ. So I think, even if we're going and talking about pre-seed rounds and individuals not tagging along for the next seed or Series A, we still have the issue of people saying, oh, well, you're still too early stage for us. So I think that you hear that far more as a female. I can give an example concretely. At one of these venture summits that I
Mhm.
recently attended, there was an investor who had done the meet to match with us.
Mhm.
And I stood there with my co founder, who happens to be a senior software architect at ASML,
Yeah.
extremely, extremely
Uh,
advanced in what he does, my CTO. Um, and we had 20-minute slots, right?
uh,
It was all these really quick meet and greets, and then do you want to continue with the
uh,
investments? I'm not going to say which investment firm it is. It's quite well known one here in the Netherlands.
uh,
They sat there with it was a very young analyst who sat there with two male founders, and the male founders had brought in all sorts of gifts
uh,
for and little things to feed the gentleman, and
yeah.
he ate into all of our time. By the time that we were actually capable of having the meeting with him, our time had passed, and it was a matter of just exchanging information. So I think that it's really interesting environment. Um, that was just based on face value, right? That
Mhm.
was just based on them, this young investor analyst being probably excited by the gifts he was receiving,
Uh,
as well as two gentlemen sitting before him. And at that event, I'd say that I saw maybe out of, you know, 200 or so people, I saw maybe 20 females.
yeah.
And you would think then that that would be a selling point for investors. Um, it's a big thing. I hear you're
Yeah.
laughing at
Yeah.
me. But the thing is that everyone thinks differently. You need to have that mix, right?
Yeah.
You need to have also, let's talk about it in real terms, in terms of commercialization. We are constantly touting diversity, but we're not applying it.
No.
So you hear all of these huge bigwigs, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk,
Mhm.
etc. Do you know off of the top of your head any famous female entrepreneurs on that level? No, right? And I'm embarrassed to say, neither do I. I don't
Yeah.
know their names. I know they exist. I
Uh,
know some of their stories. However, they're not popping out in the same way.
no, it,
So,
it is really still really
male
male
dominated.
driven world, and also the man these men are trying to reassert themselves as the quote unquote leaders of the tech world.
Yeah.
Not to say that they haven't done incredible things, by the
No,
way,
they've done amazing things.
but
But I think that the way that I look at um, at working with an investor is it's a marriage, and it
yeah.
has to be a good marriage. It's a relationship, right? And it's
Hmm.
a long-term relationship. You should hope.
Yeah.
If they believe in you, your values should be aligned, and it shouldn't matter what gender you are.
Hmm.
This is either a healthy marriage or an unhealthy marriage.
Hmm.
So,
What
you
makes
know,
a marriage healthy for you?
makes the marriage healthy for me is not having control disguised as support for example. So someone trying to control what you're doing as an investor
Hmm.
as opposed to making it a decision that you're collaboratively taking.
Uh-huh.
And they're saying, oh, no, 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 we're supporting you. We're the ones that are backing you. So you better listen to us. I have experienced this before personally.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what makes an unhealthy marriage. You always say
Is that also the risk aversion, by the way?
it could be part of the risk aversion. It could be that boundaries are violated sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
um, or not set and managed early enough
Mm-hmm.
as to what should be that. There could be misalignment that rarely then resolves later.
Yeah.
Starts out as a small problem, just like any relationship,
Yeah.
and then it snowballs into a bigger problem. Um,
How do you work
capital
around that?
Sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. That's the thing. These gentlemen or yeah, I shouldn't say gentlemen, these funding vehicles, I've primarily worked with male individuals,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why I'd said gentlemen. But these funding vehicles, they have their own portfolio companies that they want aligned in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
If they see that you're not taking the company in the direction that the fund is headed, then oftentimes they will put brakes on you,
Yeah.
or they will say, we want you to do this in a different way.
Uh-huh.
Um, we're the ones giving you the money. That's an unhealthy marriage. You
Yeah.
want communication, you want compromise, you want someone that is compatible with you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some 3 C's for you. And I think that in general, in relationships, that's something that you need to take into account. And when you're dealing with money, it's very sensitive.
Yeah.
People get very sensitive about money. You need to make sure that you're both aligned. And how do you avoid any pitfalls in the future?
Mm-hmm.
You deal with them in the beginning. You start establishing those 3 C's from the beginning, and you establish a mutual respect where there is room for collaboration with one another. There's room for making sure that all parties are satisfied and compromise is found. That's, I think, how you navigate that. You can also sit there and have a board meeting that turns out to be very aggressive and complicated with everyone shouting their different ideas, but I don't find that productive.
No.
And it should be a very healthy marriage because it is long term and you believe in what you're doing together,
Yeah, I would hope so.
right? So I
But
think
usually marriage starts there anyway, regardless of how
it
it
does,
ends.
but lots of people get divorced,
That is
unfortunately.
true. 50% or so is the rate right now. But yeah, at least what I'm hearing you say is go for the 3 C's and make sure you establish and enforce those
Correct.
early on, and
I
really make sure that it's like going back to Brain Boost. It's like really teaching people early on how they can do certain things or should do certain things.
Absolutely. I think that's something that's really important for entrepreneurs to remember.
Yeah,
Investors need us just as much as we need them.
yeah, it's a two-way street, not a
It's
one-way street.
no, I find that I see a lot of early stage founders very, very excited, even if they get a term sheet, period, or if they get a conversation. I have had with Brain Boost XR already term sheets presented to me that I've
Yeah,
denied
yeah,
because they weren't aligned with what my values were. And that's something that I did not do with neuroreality. Neuroreality, if someone was ready to write me a check, I was like,
let's
let's see
roll.
the money. Give me the money. Show me
Yeah,
the money. Like
yeah,
Tom Cruise.
yeah,
But that's just not the case anymore. For me, sustainability and scalability and the longevity of what we're doing is far more important
yeah.
than simple terms that are set out on paper. We need to really have this synergy together and work well.
Yeah. Before we close, I have one question that I wanted to ask you. And for context of people, um, I consider this a strength. So I want
My
really,
healthcare issues, I
you have
already
had
feel where you're
some
going.
healthcare issues on the way. How what's the impact of those healthcare issues? You don't have to mention what specifically you have, but who
I don't
do they impact your ability to be an entrepreneur?
So in the beginning, Dekyan, I was really, really actually concerned to let on that I did have a chronic disease.
Mhm,
And from, I'd say, 9 years ago was my diagnosis. And from that time, um, I was I was very apprehensive because I thought that people might think, oh, if she has a chronic disease and I have a chronic neurological disease,
mhm,
actually. If she has a disease, then how is she going to be able to be available at all times or do what she needs to do? I was scared people would think that, not take me seriously.
mhm,
Actually, like you said, it ended up being a huge strength for me. I get to see things from the perspective of a patient, a clinician, and a researcher, and entrepreneur,
yeah,
obviously. Uh, I see what's missing. I see what goes unseen because as a patient yourself, not everyone studied neuroscience at Oxford like I
yeah,
did, um, and went on to understand what's happening with them. So while I'm in the neurological ward and I'm laying in my bed and listening to these different conversations being had with other individuals, of course, you don't mean to be intrusive, but you're in a
yeah,
room packed with, packed with doctors and nurses talking to individuals about um, having their brain tumor removed, for
mhm,
example, right? You hear these incredibly clinical discussions that do not humanize the individual. And again, bringing them back to dignity, bringing
mhm,
them back to a place of understanding. Um, One of my moments that was the happiest of moments um, being a patient and doing what I do
mhm,
was something I wrote about in it will be released later in a book, but an experience with a young man who's about my age, and he was to have a brain tumor removed. He and I connected from across the room. I
mhm,
listened to him. I listened to what the doctors were telling him about the process, and I could see that he was very noticeably agitated. And I then, of course, reached out sort of across the room and was
mhm,
like, do you mind if, do you mind if I ask you, if you're doing all right now?
mhm,
Just simple question, right? Which bridges, creating this bridge is just enormously helpful.
yeah,
And he wasn't worried about the operation. He wasn't worried about the long rehabilitation ahead of him.
mhm,
What he was worried about was what his daughter was going to see when she walked into that room. And that he didn't feel dignified anymore because he was going to have a large scar and a metal plate throughout his head sticking
mhm,
out. So I said, if you don't mind, can I talk to you a little bit more about this?
mhm,
I overheard what the doctors and clinicians and nurses had told you and the anesthesiologist, but they didn't mention anything about your family or how to deal with these types of things. Why don't we tell your, he's like, my daughter's coming in today and I'm really nervous. I said, well, why don't we tell your daughter that dad's becoming a superhero? He
mhm,
might be different. He might look different. He might act different,
mhm,
but that's because he's gone through something extremely difficult. And in becoming this superhero that he's become, all superheroes, they have wounds and scars. And that's how I wanted to frame it for her. He and I decided that was a good thing and it worked out wonderfully. And we're actually still friends.
mhm,
So he gave me as well, and I often work with patients to understand what's the best way to make our product successful. And now, personally, as a patient, I'm happy to be able to advocate and say that I am a patient, I am an entrepreneur, I am a clinician, and I am a researcher. This is a huge strength because I can see the myriad of different challenges that everyone is facing.
Yeah.
And with my healthcare, it's a constant balancing act. So while we're building healthcare and wellness products, I have to admit I don't always prioritize, or I didn't always prioritize my health,
Mhm.
but that is something that I do to a far greater extent now. Delegation is
Mhm.
extremely important, trusting that you have the right team backing you
Mhm.
when I have to go to the hospital, for example. And now, what really changed was that I designed these products and systems that are really sustainable and only work if you don't push someone past their limits, if you humanize things, if you don't keep them just solely medical and clinical.
Yeah.
That's why I also love gamification. Um, Dignity applies to founders too.
Sounds like a really great place to close. I have one question left for you. So I'm building an AI agent. We're going back to the funding part. Um, I'm building an AI-based funding coach to connect female founders with investors and help close the funding gap. So get that 0.7% a lot higher.
I
Maybe
love
not,
that.
maybe not 50-50, but at least a lot closer to what the real split, gender split is. Uh, from your perspective, as a female founder and also an AI aficionado, what's a functionality that this app can not do without? What needs to be in?
I think early pattern and risk detection, not motivational advice. So, what
Uh-huh.
I mean by that, let's give like a concrete example. If an investor repeatedly delays decisions or reframes their boundaries, um, or says that you're lacking commitment and they're asking for increasingly more unpaid work and putting pressure on you. And this continues to escalate even before capital is committed. They're asking for insane due diligence that is these are types of things that I think should the system should flag, as a
Uh,
risk pattern. That this particular VC is extremely risk averse. They're going to go into hyper mode in due diligence, and
yeah.
they're going to ask you to change your vision and your product, etc. Um, it should surface early while the founder still has leverage and options. So,
Hmm.
in coaching them, the founders don't necessarily always need these confidence boosts. Of course, we do,
Hmm.
but we need early truth before the cost of staying becomes higher than the cost of willing to walk away.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think that's
especially early on, those costs are it's important to get those costs clear.
absolutely,
So
the pains and gains for both the founder and for the investor remain, but I think that there are clear signals and clear patterns that you can identify utilizing an AI tool that will give those red flag signals.
okay, so include not only motivational advice, but also these are red flag signals
Absolutely.
given the response from an investor.
Absolutely. Think that that's a I think that's a really important thing that you stay true to yourself. Taking on an investor who is extremely experienced in the field's expertise, but maintaining your idea and your strengths. And again, going back to
Yeah,
knowing that they need you just as much as you need them.
yeah,
So make
yeah.
sure that
Also to make it balanced, the
balance.
relationship balanced.
Absolutely agreed. And, we're all people. we like working with who we like working with, and may sound simple, but just risk detection already. Some people might like doing really long due diligence. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think that anyone does. But in general, any type of a repeated delay or a reframing of what you're doing, a reframing of their boundaries with you, I think those are all red flags. And though also, as I said before, asking you to do unpaid work, that is part of due diligence, of course, but
Mm.
don't do it excessively.
Yeah, but
That's
also know what needs to be done. In
exactly,
terms of some requests for extra work are reasonable because yeah,
absolutely, it's necessary.
it's necessary, but some are just because actually they don't want you to do it and
No,
they
and
don't
that's
want to invest in you.
and they're just putting you through, jumping through the hoop, jumping
Yeah.
through the hoop, jumping through the hoop. I got to terms with a group that took 8 months because um, their board had bylaws that were written in that it had to be a unanimous vote. So I had to convince everyone, meeting after meeting after meeting, and it was like,
Yeah.
I've already presented this to you guys. Get to term sheets and don't even agree on them
Yeah.
after 8 months of extra work that I've done. So that's why I say really early signal detection before you've gone so far. You need early truths, hard truths. This is going to be a really tough sell to this particular investor. Or this is an investment group who is far less risk averse and will be interested in talking to you at an early stage.
Yeah. And that sounds like a great advice to close out with. Faviola Dadis, thank you very much for a really great conversation.
It's my
Really,
pleasure.
really insightful again. Um, if people want to learn more about you or Brain Boost XR, where would you like to send them?
LinkedIn is always a great first professional place to send individuals. Our website, my Instagram, I tend to utilize science communication as a means of connecting with individuals.
Mhm.
So my Instagram is not just fluff. I would say
Mhm.
I do try, if I'm wearing a red dress, for example, to tie that into the neuroscience of red. But so you can find out more about Brain Boost on our Brain Boost Instagram, on my personal Instagram, that's at Neuroscience Barbie. Sounds a little strange, but from a past life, and I still do embrace my girly side.
Yeah,
And other than that, we'll be sharing regular updates, and coming soon, we'll have a newsletter for individuals to keep up to date with us and what we're doing.
cool. And we'll include those links in the show notes as usual.
Thank you.
So, again, Fabi, thank you very much for an amazing conversation. Really enjoyed this. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. And until the next episode, as always, keep being awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you for listening to episode 146 of Women Disrupting Tech, titled How a Female Founder Restores Dignity for Brain Injury Patients with Faviola Dadis. Faviola and I hope you found our conversation as inspiring and informative as we intended it to be. And if you have any questions for Faviola, please leave them in the comments on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. I do read all the comments and I'll make sure you get an answer. If you want to connect with Faviola or learn more about Brain Boost XR, you can do so via the links in the show notes. As usual, you can find the show notes at womendisruptingtech.blog and on my Substack via the links in the caption. And I invite you to check out episode 4 of the podcast to learn about Faviola's previous company, NeuroReality. If you found this episode useful, please take a moment to rate and review the show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And if you don't follow us yet, hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss a future episode. With that, thank you for listening. I hope to see you in the next episode. And until then, as always, keep being awesome.